Oh, okay. So we're continuing our inquiry class, our inquiry into theology, an introduction to the discipline of theology. And so we're going to be coming to an end of this class eventually. But for those of you who are taking this class to fulfill the requirement for the Permanent Diaconate Formation Program of St. Cyprian School of Theology, I want to remind you that I would like for you to write a 2 or 3 page paper expressing what you have gotten out of the course, what you have learned about theology, how it has affected you, and if there was a particular area of theological inquiry that really captured your interest. So work on that, give it some thought, and also I would like to be in touch with you personally, so we'll need to exchange emails as we come to a close of this course, and also in addition to that, I would like to have a telephone conversation with you. So at some point we will be in communication directly, and then we can talk more about the paper you're going to write in fulfillment of the requirement of this class. For those of you who are taking this class in preparation for receiving the sacrament of confirmation, it's important that you be thinking about what saint's name that you'll be taking on as your confirmation name, and to begin thinking about the day of your confirmation and what we will be doing. More on that later. So now we will proceed with tonight's lesson. Tonight we're still in the area of theological inquiry called Ecclesiology. There's a lot of subheadings in Ecclesiology, which is the study of the church, the nature of the church, the life of the church, and of course when we get into the life of the church, we get into the kinds of things that the church does in the world. And tonight we're going to be looking at the liturgical year. The church has a calendar, and the calendar serves a very important purpose in the life of the church. Every year we go through a cycle in which the story of salvation is told to us again. So the essence of the gospel of Jesus is that it is a story. It is a narrative. And, you'll need your worksheets. Did you get them? Okay, there's another one here. There's 2 different worksheets. And this is the one that took place in history. Certain events that are the source and definition of the faith that we practice. And so one of the things about the liturgy of the church, this is what we do in community. It is the prayer of the church, it's the worship of the church. In the liturgy we celebrate sacraments, but we are also constantly telling a part of that story. And so the liturgical year is a way for us to go through that narrative again. The narrative is called salvation history. It's the story of our salvation. It's the big story. Often I point out that we each, as a unique individual person, we have our own story. Your life is your story. It is the narrative. And it's very important to you because you're the main character in your story. And eventually your story becomes your legacy that is passed on. And there will be people who will survive you and live on, and they will remember as much of the story as you were able to disclose to them. Our story is the collection of all the events that were important to happen in our life, the sum total of that. But our individual story is significant from the Christian point of view only insofar as it is connected with the big story. And the big story is the story of Jesus. So to help us remember, and the church is very good at remembering, we refer to what is called the memory of the church. How is it that the church can remember 2,000 years of history and so many lives of faith? We do so by following a particular calendar of observances. So you will notice that there are different seasons throughout the year that have a particular focus on a particular part of the story. The Christmas season is about the nativity of Jesus. The Advent story is about the events that lead up to the coming of Jesus. And then we have the season of Easter, in which we focus in upon the death, the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Then we have the Ascension and Pentecost, and there are special days that mark certain things.
And special colors.
Oh yeah, and special colors.
They're color-coded.
Yeah, they're color-coded. I'm glad you brought that up, Polly. All of these are sensual things that we associate with different events in the story. So it helps us to remember. The colors are done very intentionally and deliberately. And then there's all kinds of symbols and themes associated with these various seasons. So in a way, it just keeps us mindful that of the story that is now being integrated with our personal stories in the present moment. So it's a way of reliving those events from the past, and it's the memory of the church. Another thing that is happening in the liturgical calendar are saints' days. Now, you're familiar with certain saints' days like St. Patrick's Day or St. Valentine's Day or St. Francis of Assisi Day. These days help also aid in the memory of the church by reminding us of significant lives of those people who lived in the past. As the story is an open-ended story, the big story, and it flows throughout church history. It didn't end when Jesus ascended into heaven. It continued on the day of Pentecost, and it continues to happen. In other words, the book of Acts, which is a history of the beginning of the church, is not complete, not till the second coming. So the story still unfolds through the ages, and the lives of the saints, when they're commemorated on a calendar, then it's an aid to us remembering all of these other characters throughout history that have contributed something significant to our faith experience living today. And who knows? Centuries from now, they may be celebrating your feast day and remembering the contribution that you made. Steve Ross of Orange County. Oh, yes. Yeah.
St. Stephen.
Yeah, St. Stephen of Orange County. Yeah, he was the guy that did such and such. Yeah. So anyway, the memory of the church is extremely important. And in Catholicism, it's especially important, and we're very much committed to this. And the memory of the church is simply called tradition. That is the memory of the church. And the beauty of Catholicism is that Catholicism holds on to all of this stuff. I know that in my own experience, I grew up in an evangelical home, as a Baptist. The Baptists do not have that sense of tradition or historical consciousness. They eradicated everything. They don't observe. They don't have a liturgical calendar, although they'll celebrate Christmas, but originally Baptists didn't celebrate Christmas. And so in a more radical time at the beginning of the Baptists. So growing up as an evangelical, it was like there's us living today, and maybe there was a guy named Martin Luther 500 years ago that was supposed to be important, and then it's the New Testament, and that's it. What happened between those last 2,000 years? Well, they lost that memory. But Catholicism is the branch of the church that has retained that memory, and it's rich. In fact, there's so much material, you'll never be able to get to it all in a lifetime. So if you ever say, I'm going to read the lives of every saint, well, yeah, you'll read a lot of them, but you won't ever read all of them. I mean, it's just so much material. But this is the wonder and the richness of the Catholic tradition, is that as Catholics, we don't throw away anything. We're hoarders of memories, you know, because it has something to say to us. So the liturgical year is a device that is used. Now, the church didn't invent the liturgical calendar. The liturgical calendar in our tradition precedes our tradition. It goes back into the pages of the Old Testament. And so we will see when we look at the religion of ancient Israel that they already understood this, and they developed a liturgical year in which there were certain seasons and festivals and certain days that were observed. And the whole point of that is to re-engage that narrative, to relive those events again. The most important one being Passover. And they'll tell you, right, in the Haggadah, which is the book that they follow to celebrate the Passover meal, every Jewish home does this that are practicing Jews. They'll tell you right in the text, we do this because we imagine ourselves being there present. And in a way, we are. So we are the slaves in Egypt. We are the ones being liberated. We are the ones being brought out of slavery under the leadership of Moses. And they do it every year. And this constant repetition makes the story a part of us. It's one thing to read a story and go, well, that's an interesting story out there, outside of yourself. But this story, the Jewish story of their exodus from Egypt, or as Christians, our story, which is centered upon Jesus, that's our collective story. We repeat it again and again, so it never leaves us. It's internalized. It's in our subconscious. It shows up in our dreams, in our art, in our conversation. We're not even thinking about it consciously. It's just a part of us. This is why it's the constant repetition of the story again and again and again. Some people think it's boring because it's so familiar. And that's sad. Because what I have learned, because of my engagement with the story, and if you go to church on a regular basis throughout the year, is each year goes by, you get a different insight about the story. Because you've changed in a year. Things that went by you last year, all of a sudden this year, every Easter, there's something about the Easter narrative that flies out and slaps me in the face. It's always been there, but it never registered with me, but I saw something new. And for me this year, it was the anointing of Jesus by Mary, the sister of Martha. That was, I never thought about it, didn't have the insight. Mother Esther Diane brought it up in a class, and then it showed up in the readings. It just stood out for me, and it was just like, all of a sudden, this is what my attention was brought to. It was something that I knew all along, but I never paid attention to it. And so if you're engaged, you'll have this experience. And this is why it's so important that to observe the liturgical calendar as we go through it year after year, because you're growing in your understanding in your faith. It's forming you. More importantly, it's not only forming you, we say spiritual formation. It is doing that. The story forms you, but it also forms your character as a person. So the one thing that the Baptists did have, they had this great hymn, Tell Me the Stories of Jesus. Stories that I love to hear. Tell me the stories of Jesus. Da, 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 da. You remember that? Yeah. And in the song, the poet who wrote, the lyricist who wrote that says he never tires of hearing the story again and again and again. And so that's what we are. We're sinking more deeply into the story. The liturgical calendar is one of the ways that the church has achieved this consciousness. So, the liturgical year, let's look at the worksheet with the blanks in it. The liturgical year is the commemorative, the word is commemorative, C-O-M-M-E-M-O-R-A-T-I-V-E, commemorative celebration throughout a calendar year of the saving deeds God accomplished in Jesus Christ. The whole mystery of Christ, from his incarnation to the day of Pentecost, and the expectation of his coming again, is recalled by the church during the course of the year. Did I say saving deeds?
Yes.
That's right. You got it? Okay. Roman numeral 2. Early in the development of human cultures, due to the observation of the cyclical changes of seasons, the phases of the moon, the movement of the stars, the regularity of the passing of night and day, and the cycles of life, came the ability to measure time. To measure time, the word is measure, and to predict coming changes in time. Annual calendars were created and were regarded as being sacred because they aided the human understanding of the mystery of life. So, we're so cut off from nature. We live in artificial light. We live in artificial cubicles most of the time. But our ancestors, Homo sapiens, lived in the world. And so they absolutely depended for their survival on observing the times and the seasons of the year. So if they were wandering people, they had to know when the bird migrations would happen, when animal migrations would go. They were very close and observed the changing of the seasons. And remember the old Westerns we used to watch, and there would be a Native American and Indian, we called them back then. And they would say, many moons ago. You know, those kinds of things. Yeah, which was an actual expression. And the idea is that's how they kept track of time. Not because they had their smartphone or even a watch. They observed what was going, they told time by the temperature in the air, the changing of the leaves, the changing of seasons. So this is a profoundly human experience, and it's universal in all cultures. Now, calendars based upon the changing patterns of the days and years became an important tool to aid human survival and the development of human culture and civilization. With the rise of civilization, which was made possible by agriculture, then these agricultural societies began to develop calendars. The Egyptians had calendars, the Mesopotamian had calendars, the ancient Chinese had calendars, and the ancient civilizations of the Americas, like the Aztecs and the Mayas and the Incas, they also developed calendars. And these calendars were correlated to the movement of the heavenly bodies like stars, moon, and the sun, and the planets. And in fact, because of these some of these calendars, particularly the Aztec calendar, I'm told, is extremely accurate. So our ancestors may not have had the benefit of the technology and knowledge that we have, the accumulation of centuries of knowledge, but they were keen observers. Mm-hmm. They knew. They could look at the sky and be able to identify things. We look at it if we can see the stars. Here in Southern California, we don't know what we're looking at. You know, but they really knew. And so, and as a result of the development of the calendar, also came the development simultaneously of mathematics. So see, all these things are correlated together.
So with this first blank is survival, and the next two
yeah, where was I?
Culture and civilization.
Culture and civilization. Human survival, we're on A, and the development of human culture and civilization. Number one, in hunting-gathering societies, it enabled peoples to predict the migration of animals that were necessary to the survival of the group. The migration of animals. I think the word is migration, yeah. Got that? Number two, in agricultural societies, it enabled peoples, it aided in the production of food in knowing when to plant and when to harvest. You don't want to plant too early, your crops might not make it, or too late, they may not make it, and you don't want to harvest too late or too early. So this is why agricultural societies needed to have a calendar. So the word in that is production of food. B, in the sacred book of Genesis, the importance of measuring time, and predicting the seasons is indicated. I think you all know the first chapter of Genesis, the creation poem, and there's a particular passage, God created the sun and the moon and the stars as lights in the sky to determine times and seasons. That's what the poetical writer of the first chapter of Genesis says. So in number 2, Genesis 8:22, in the poetic fragment within the Noah tradition, in that scripture passage, God says that they will always be the 4 seasons of the year. Speaks to Moses, that this is something you can rely on. So there was already this consciousness of the importance of keeping track of the movement of time and correlating that to what would become a calendar. Number 3, you ever wonder why a week is 7 days? Why isn't it 10 days? We're just so used to it being this way because it's always been this way. Well, not necessarily, but the 7-day week, it comes to us from our Hebrew heritage. The number 7 was the day, is the number of perfection. So 1 week was 7 days. And so that is how that became established. And you know, the whole creation poem is built upon the days of the week. The idea that there were 6 days of creation and the 7th day is the Sabbath, the day of rest. I have to tell you a story. When the French Revolution happened, you know, remember Robespierre and all those guys and the guillotine and all that stuff? Well, they really tried to reorder all of society, and they understood that the normal calendar that was being used, which is derived from the Bible, from the Hebrew people, and then used in the church to keep days and for Christianity. Well, the revolutionary government became so radical, they wanted to eradicate religion even. So they decided to say, we're not going to do a 7-day week anymore. And it's not going to be the year that you thought it was going to be. We're going to start over, and it's going to be a 10-day week. They couldn't change the society. Even though the government made this decree to do it, people were so into the rhythm. So they couldn't do it arbitrarily. When the Bolsheviks overthrew the czars, and Russia, Holy Russia, was a religious society. And then when they tried to enforce atheism, they wanted to change the days of the week. They couldn't do it. And unlike our days of the week are named for pagan Roman deities and Norse deities. Yeah. Thursday is for Thor. Wednesday is for Odin. So on and so forth. We still have pagan names in the English language. But in the Russian language, Sunday is called the day of resurrection. It's Resurrection Day. It's just that way normally. So when they tried to enforce atheism, they couldn't change the practice. Everybody thought of the first day of the week as being Resurrection Day. That's exactly what they called it. It's still that way in the Russian language to this day. So you can see the importance of calendars and how they become fixed in our minds and regulate our consciousness and our life. Okay, number 3, the 7-day week was established early in ancient Hebrew culture, with the 7th day becoming a regular holy day called the Sabbath. The 7-day week ultimately became standard for nearly all the peoples of the world in the present day. That's quite something, don't you think? So you got that, everybody? Okay. All right. Now I'm on page 2, right? C. Annual festivals came into being to commemorate important events that occurred in the life of a people, to enable them to remember these important experiences and to pass on these memories to future generations. When most people are illiterate, how is the story conveyed? You can't read it through the observation of these days that are designated in order to remember them. Okay, did you get all the words down? Okay, good, okay. Number 1, certain experiences were valued because through them the people gained important wisdom and understanding that better enabled them to survive. You notice how I'm using the word survive a lot? They weren't doing it because it was a nice thing to do, or they were being sweetly sentimental. Wasn't that. It's for the sake of survival. And if I forget my wedding anniversary, my survival is threatened. So it's about, this is basic human existence to survive. And it was critical. Number 2, commemorating important events in the life and history of a people help to unify a group and to reinforce their group identity. Group identity is critical for the formation of families, clans, tribes, and nations. We all share a common identity at various levels. But we do have a national identity. If someone's going to ask you what nationality you are, we would say American. You know, we have this shared common life. And then we also can say, beyond being an American, what's even more important, I'm a Christian. But immediately that gives me an identity. The identity because I participate in a common life of a community, which has a certain tradition and has a calendar that follows to reinforce that identity. And it unifies us. This is why there's the 4th of July and Memorial Day and Thanksgiving. Every society has certain important days. And it reminds us that we're Americans. The same in the church. Okay, A. So I'm on 2. Did I finish 2? Okay, A. Group identity and the establishment of well-defined relationships between the members of a group greatly increased the survival and advancement. The survival and advancement of a people in a relatively hostile world. Even though we as moderns, or some people call us postmoderns today, take the calendar for granted, it meant whether or not it meant life and death to ancient peoples. It would make the difference between whether a particular cultural group would survive or not. So what we take for granted is of actually critical importance. Isn't that the way it is about most things? B, observing a calendar commemorating the past experiences of a group was an effective way of transmitting culture from one generation to the next. And as far as we can tell, Homo sapiens, that's us, are the only living creatures that have what is called culture. Knowledge that we pass on to the next generation. Now, what's interesting is that those who are studying animal life realize that some of the higher mammals seem to do the same thing. And part of that is killer whales. There's been some experiments that killer whales actually have learned behavior that they teach the next generation to do. And they know this because if it was extinctual, all killer whales would do it. But in this case, it's a particular population that lives here on the West Coast. Have you read those articles? I read that and thought, that's fascinating. So, interesting, isn't it? Okay, where was I? Okay, the cultural achievements of the past would not be lost, but preserved for the benefit of succeeding generations. Like this, I learned to decorate a Christmas tree, not from a school, I learned it from my father. And my children learn how to decorate a Christmas tree from me. But the only reason I bother with a Christmas tree is because I'm following a calendar. And December 25th is coming up, and this is what we do. And it's unthinkable not to do it. Isn't that true? It's true for all of you. Okay. Something has been passed on.
And
Microphone.
Oh, yes.
And different families have different traditions about how to go about decorating a Christmas tree. And you can get into real trouble if you go to somebody else's home to help them decorate, and it turns out they do it a totally different way than what you learned.
Yeah, so you have your own family is a mini culture. That's true. Family traditions. Okay. Very well said. Thank you, Mother Esther Diane. Where am I now?
See.
C. Okay. Especially in oral cultures, knowledge was effectively preserved and transmitted through observing the rhythms and the patterns of the sacred calendar by keeping fixed annual festivals and fasts. This is universal. D. These patterns of human behavior based on an agreed upon calendar is what tradition is. That is what tradition is. It's sad that in our rapidly secularizing culture, where now I think the percentage of people who actually participate in a religious tradition has been greatly diminished. It's no longer the majority of the population. It's under 50%. I hear oftentimes 40% of the population. But it's sad because when you're brought up in a particular religious tradition, you have all of these stories, all this sense of identity and belonging. And when you don't have that, I think it diminishes the quality of life. It diminishes a sense of belonging and identity and all of that. And I've met so many parents that says, we're going to raise our kids, but we're not going to go to church. They can decide on their own religion when they get older. Really? You know? You have deprived them of the passing on of a tradition that serves us in ways that we don't even think about the value of it. Yes, Polly?
I think for those of us who have dropped away from the church, that's what brings us back. The yearning for the tradition.
Wow. Wow. Was that what happened to you?
Yeah, me. That was my experience, yeah. I was missing something, but I guess I just kept looking until I found it here.
Wow. And I'm so glad you did.
Me too.
That's great. Here at St. Matthew's, as your pastor, we are a church that is progressive on issues of inclusivity, of recognizing the equality of men and women. I mean, people think we're radical, but when you come here, no, I mean, we're not handling snakes. We're not swinging from chandeliers. No, we're a very traditional church when you think about it, because it's important to me that we are faithful observers of the tradition, not only for our own sake, but for the sake of those who come after. Because if we eradicate a practice in our generation, it dies, and the next generation doesn't have the benefit of it. You know, so we follow. So people would say when they come to St. Matthew, "Wow, you're so traditional." Yeah, that's the point. That's what we're about. We want to hold it all, and we want to. What we've received from a past, we're going to pass on, and perhaps we'll have added something of value to be passed on. Certain things, like one of the things that happens here at St. Matthew's in this generation that we've contributed. One is. Every Sunday, the kids are bringing up food to the altar for the poor. This is at the 10:30 Mass. So you have to get into that tradition, you have to come to the 10:30 Mass. But we've done that for so many years that the kids have grown up in the church think that that's normal. That's what you're supposed to do. And then when they go to visit another Catholic church, the Roman Catholic church, how come they're not doing that? I remember when Sheree and Raven, two little girls who were born and grew up in this church, Jason and Tanya Adams, two girls, they're now adults, the two girls. But they took them back to Baltimore to visit Grandma's church. And Grandma went to a local Roman Catholic church. And they went to church and they went to Mass and everything, and a lot of it looked familiar. But then the two little girls looked up at their parents, Jason and Tanya, and they were looking up at the altar. Yeah, it's very much like our church at St. Matthew's, but where are the women?
Wow.
You see, already, and it wasn't like we pounded it into their heads that, you always got to look for women, that's the sign of the only true church or something like that. No, it's just, But they were so accustomed to that it seemed odd to them that there were no women up at the altar. You see? So we received an ancient tradition, but we made a contribution to that tradition because tradition develops over time and each generation makes a contribution. That's why you can look at things that we do in the church. Some of it goes back 1,500 years. Some of it only goes back 200 years. But the tradition accumulates things on the way. Now, some things are bad and should be discarded. And that's what every once in a while the church has to reform itself and clean house and get rid of the junk. That's what Vatican II was doing. Okay. Are you having a good time? Okay. Okay. And I don't even know where I am anymore. Number 3, okay. The calendar brought order to the chaos of human existence. The calendar brought order to the chaos of human existence. Can you imagine living without your calendar? Could you get much of your work done, Steve? I imagine you're very dependent on that calendar. That's what brought you here tonight. The calendar brought order to the chaos of human existence.
Spell chaos?
What's that?
Spell chaos.
Oh yeah, chaos. You never saw Get Smart? They were always fighting chaos.
Oh, that's
Control and chaos. I just thought it was brilliant comedy. Anyway, chaos is spelled C-H-A-O-S. Chaos. C-H-A-O-S. So you had it right all along.
we're guessing.
Well, you knew it all along. See, you're smarter than you think. Number 4, human civilization is still dependent upon the calendar. Without it, modern civilization could not function. These things that we take for granted. Okay. Roman numeral 3, are you there? The ancient Hebrew calendar. Now we're going to look at the calendar that comes from the Hebrews, which is in what we call the Old Testament, but now it's more politically correct to refer to that body of literature no longer as the Old Testament, but as the Hebrew Scriptures. We do this because we understand that that's important to our brothers and sisters who are Jewish. So we're trying to get away from using the phrase Old Testament because it's insulting to Jews. Because to them, it's not the Old Testament. You know, yeah.
It's their current one.
Yeah, that's their covenant. Yeah, you know, and so so out of deference, we are now trying to switch over, as if we haven't done enough changing in our generation. Now we are, but still, I support this change. We call it the Hebrew Scriptures. Okay. A, the Sabbath. You've heard of that. That is the basic holy day for the Jews. It's one of the big 10 commandments. Commandment number 4, remember the Sabbath day. By the way, the Sabbath day, even among Christians, is Saturday. Sunday is not a Sabbath day. Sunday is Resurrection Day. It is, we call it the Lord's Day, because it's the day He rose from the dead. It is the day, the first day of the new creation. So that's why we celebrate Eucharist on the first day of the week, because Jesus was raised from the dead on the first day of the week. And Saturdays is still the Jewish Sabbath. Now, the reason why we don't observe Saturday as Christians, it's not because we're Christians. It's because we're not Jewish. It's part of their covenant through the Torah. They must observe, as a sign of that Mosaic covenant, they must observe Saturday Sabbath. But we're Gentiles. And when the Jewish leaders of the Christian church, you know, Peter, Paul, and James and those guys, when they said that Gentiles can come in and are not going to be required to observe Torah, that meant we didn't have to observe Saturday as the Sabbath. But in a way, Sunday has become like that. Because in Catholic school, when we looked at the fourth commandment, what did they tell you? That was Sunday, and you come to church on Sunday, right? It's your obligation. Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes Sunday, the day of the resurrection, is also called the 8th day.
Yeah. It's a new week.
It's a new week.
Yeah.
It's as opposed to a 7-day week, we've got a whole new kind of week starting.
Yeah, and you will notice that until quite recently, Sunday is the first day of the week. It's not the weekend. The weekend ends on Saturday. So, but now I'm noticing that some calendars are throwing Sunday as the last day of the week because it's on the weekend, and they're starting with Monday as the first day. Does your calendar work that way? Mine, I use Google Calendar, and it still has Sunday. Sunday is the first day of the week, and that's really important for us symbolically. So if we ever get into culture wars again, and they want to make Sunday the last day of the week, I'm going to fight that to the end. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, remember the Sabbath day. Now, the Sabbath day commemorates the completion of the creation of the world. Based on that poem in Genesis, God rests from his labor. And so he sanctifies it. B, it commemorates the end of Israel's slavery. The people of Israel are given by God rest from their forced labor. This is very interesting to me because it's about social justice. When you were a slave, there were no weekends. There was no days off. There was no paid leave. You worked every single day from sun up to sundown, and that's what you did. There was no... So in the Mosaic Law, it was, there's going to be rest. There's going to be a day of rest, and everybody's going to rest. None of this 24/7. And what's sad is that in our American economy, I'm going to be a preacher now for a moment, in our American economy, we have forgotten the importance of that, and people are working 24/7 again, particularly in the United States. And I think it's unproductive, you know. So there's another commentary from me. Okay. All right. Then there is the Sabbath year, number 2. Not only did they have a Sabbath day, 1 day out of 7, but the Sabbath year was 1 year out of 7 would be a year of rest. So on the 7th year, it was the year of Sabbath. You let the land rest. You didn't plant crops. What you've done is you've been storing crops all along for that 7th year, and you didn't harvest crops on that day. Now it turns out, they realize, is that it's important for land to lay fallow. So what they were doing was actually increasing the production of the soil by allowing it to have a year of recovery. Isn't that interesting? It was an agricultural society. And so the 7th year, no one planted crops. Isn't that interesting? And that's recorded for us in the Torah, in Exodus, and in Leviticus. Then, not only that, but they carry it further. Number 3, the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee is after a cycle of 7 Sabbath years, that is 49 years. There would come after that the 50th year, and the 50th year was called the year of Jubilee. And what they did on the year of Jubilee in ancient Israelite society, or what they were supposed to do, was all debts were forgiven. Land that was sold because you were in debt automatically goes back to you. It's the year of Jubilee. And there is no planting of crops. There is no work. You get a whole year off. Cool. And if you live long enough, that might happen to you once in a lifetime, and if you're lucky, twice in a lifetime.
It was twice the life, and you don't realize you were.
Yeah. So anyway, there was the year of Jubilee. And those who were sold themselves into indentured servitude because they were in debt, they were set free. And it was very good. It's like kind of a resetting of the clock. And it became a way of redistributing the wealth, because usually in 50 years' time, wealth starts to accumulate to the few. This way it was spread out again. And that was the way it was in the society of ancient Israel. A sacred year, this is about the year of Jubilee, when all production would cease. B, a sacred year when all debts would be forgiven. That's the year of Jubilee. When Jesus quotes Isaiah the prophet, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to, give sight to the blind, to set the prisoners free, and to proclaim the year of favor of the Lord, the year of rest, the year of Jubilee." Okay. The liturgical year of ancient Israel Important observations. Number one, the primary source of the early liturgical calendar for Israel, ancient Israel, is in the book of Leviticus. That's what is usually called the third book of the Bible, the third book of Torah. Leviticus has a lot of ancient material in there, and it's called Leviticus, which is referring to the priests, Levitical priests. And it's a boring book, except some of the treasures in there is that it tells you the different festivals that are to be observed. That's interesting. But when I was getting close to being ordained a priest, and I happened to be reading through the Bible again, when I came across Leviticus, all of a sudden it became interesting to me because, this is a priest's handbook. It was telling me what priests used to do back in those days. And so it became a book of rubrics because priests have handbooks now. We have booked handbooks that tell us this is how you bless someone, this is how you bless an object, this is how you bless, we have all that kind of stuff. That's what the book of Leviticus is. It was like a handbook for priests so they know how to do all the rites and rituals and sacrifices they were to function into. And I'm getting off the track here. The third book of Moses is the collection, the primary source of the early liturgical calendar for ancient Israel is in the book of Leviticus, the third book of Moses, in the collection of sacred writings called the Torah. By the way, the word Torah means the instruction. Some people translate it as law, but instruction, I think, is a better word for it. I think when it's the law, I'm thinking of commands that are oppressing me. Instruction is like a how-to, right? So I like the more positive way of thinking of it as instruction. Number two, Leviticus is a book of rubrics. Like I said before, rubrics, R-U-B-R-I-C-S, handbook for the cultic worship of ancient Israel. It's what it is. It tells you how to do it. Number three, observance of the sacred calendar is ritual behavior. Ritual behavior. 4, what does the word ritual mean? Do you see that? Ritual. Rhythmic movement. Ritual is rhythmic movement that becomes a dance, that becomes cooperative or harmonized movement between the participants of a ritual group. The group dance then becomes a procession. A procession is a group movement toward a future, and I use the word eschatological. Is that there for you? Okay, eschatological, big word, and we're going to get into a whole lesson about that in a few weeks. E-S-C-H-A-T-O-L-O-G-I-C-A-L, eschatological. It means the end times, or it means our destiny. What is the final destination of the human race? So ritual is a procession, a movement towards our future eschatological or climatic moment of encounter, and we're talking about the divine encounter, the beatific vision, when we encounter and we know as fully as we are known now. We encounter the divine. Okay, so I mention this to you because we human beings by nature are ritualistic. We follow certain patterns. You have your morning ritual. Mike, what's your morning ritual? What happens to you when you get up?
I stumble into my office and check my email.
Yeah, that's what you do. It's what you do, yeah, right? That's what you, what do you, Steve?
Boy, check email.
Yeah.
Now I can actually do it from bed on my phone.
Yeah, you don't even get out of bed. Okay, what's your ritual? What do you do, Kristen?
I kiss my puppy. And
That's not
turn
me.
on the TV.
Oh, not you? Oh, okay.
Oh wait, I lied.
Because he's busy checking his mail.
And then I turn on the TV.
There you go.
I lied. I do my back stretches first thing.
I was gonna say.
My back stretches.
Okay.
I do stretching for my back.
Okay. Tony, what's your ritual?
I'm a traditionalist. I do the 3 S's.
Oh.
There you go.
What is that?
Well, I'll be completely crap shower shaved.
Oh, the 3 S's. Yeah, I got it now. Diane, what's your ritual?
Oh, coffee.
Okay. Yeah. Tammy, what's your morning ritual?
Get out, take a shower, go downstairs, make breakfast, watch TV, go back upstairs, finish getting ready for work.
It's that sequence that you do, because by nature we follow these patterns of behavior. That way we don't have to think too hard. Like, what am I going to do now? It's just like we just do what we do. And so we are ritualistic creatures. Now, an individual will have ritual behaviors, but group behaviors are even more dependent upon ritual. For example, I don't know if I've given you an example of this before in another context. I play the guitar, and it's a wonderful instrument. And when I was in school, in seminary, it was a great way for me to relax. I'd pull out my guitar and I would just play away, and I could do anything I wanted. I could be spontaneous. It was nothing I had to do with what I was doing musically on the guitar. And someone could walk in the room, as they often did, and they can maybe listen to it and appreciate what I was doing. But I was having my own individual personal experience. It didn't include them. It was purely by accident that I had this person walk in the room. However, the moment that I want to do something with another person playing the guitar, two of us at the same time playing the guitar, which is a cool experience, because there's like this kinetic energy that flows when two people are playing together and harmonizing. You've seen that, musicians do that. But all of a sudden, I don't have the freedom I used to have. And I have to get into a pattern, ritualistic behavior in order for us to do it together. But it's worth it. I lose some of my freedom, but it's so much more satisfying, the results of it. An orchestra. All those musicians, maybe there's 100-piece orchestra up there, and they put out, when you don't get this listening to it on the radio, you have to go to a concert. It's powerful. It's like this wave of energy coming at you through it, and it's beautiful. All those people are engaged in ritual behavior, so they can do it together. So ritual is intrinsic to human social existence. So the next time you have some super Christian tell you, oh, you're so ritualistic. Yeah, well, let me let you in on something. Everybody is. Everything is ritualistic. The question is it good ritual or bad ritual? From our point of view, your ritual sucks. No, don't say that last line. So we Catholics take great pride. We got ritual down. We do it well. But it's not spontaneous. That's okay. All right, where am I? I'm editorializing so much. F? Five. Oh, ritual is bringing the entire person, spirit, soul, and body into harmony with the movement of the sacred in our midst. Just like I have to come into harmony with another musician to create that beautiful music, what we are doing on the human side is trying to bring ourselves in harmony with the Spirit of God. That's what we do every Sunday morning. We're trying to move ourselves into sacred behavior, a sacred dance, if you will, with the divine. So, okay.
Could I make a
Yes.
I think it's important to realize that at the liturgy, we begin with an introductory procession, and through the course of the liturgy, event by event, through the liturgy, we're going through the whole of salvation history until we end with the Eucharist at the altar at the end of the liturgical movement. The way we read the lessons, the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures lesson, then a New Testament lesson with the Gospel. You can follow the motion of the progression of salvation history through the course of the liturgy.
Yeah, that's beautifully well said. And there is a technical phrase for that. It means it is called by liturgists progression in solemnity. It's a movement forward. It gets more serious as we get into it. And it's called progression and solemnity. What you were describing so well, so beautifully said. Thank you, Mother Esther Diane. Okay. I don't even know where I am anymore.
The liturgical year.
Oh, the liturgical year according to Leviticus 23. Here is the ancient Jewish liturgical year. This is what Jesus would have experienced, and it celebrates their history and certain events. We talked about the Sabbath. Wait, did I already do that? Okay, the Sabbath, it's the 7th day of each week, Saturday. It's a day of sacred assembly. That's when they would go to synagogue. By the way, the Jewish day does not begin at midnight. It begins at sundown. So that's why a lot of Jews go to synagogue on Friday evening, because on Friday evening, it's actually Saturday. The Sabbath begins. You see? Okay. In verses 23, verses 4 to 14, the Passover of the Lord and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Passover of the Lord and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It is the 14th day of the first month of twilight. It's called Passover. It's the 14th of Nisan. The 15th day, and for 7 days, is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it's that which Jesus was celebrating in Jerusalem, where the Last Supper comes from. He actually died during that feast, the Passover. Then, what are some other things associated with the Feast of Unleavened Bread? Well, it also celebrates the barley harvest. That's when barley is harvested in early spring. The sheaf of the first fruits of the harvest. It is a wave offering on that day after the first Sabbath, after Passover. A pilgrimage feast, they go to Jerusalem, and a commemoration of the Exodus. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
I get Passover mixed up with what happened when the Jews had to slaughter something.
A lamb.
And put blood on their door frames.
That was the first Passover. That's it.
Okay, but didn't that happen after Jesus was born?
No, the Passover happened after Moses was born. It's very old. It goes back to the Hebrew story when they were the slaves in Egypt.
They're commemorating the event of getting out of Egypt when Moses leads them out. But in order for the last of the 10 horrible things that are going to happen to the Egyptians if they don't let the people go, is the slaughter of the firstborn. And an angel of death passes over, that's where we get the word Passover, passes over the houses in Egypt, and to protect themselves from the angel of death killing the firstborn in the house, they slaughter the lamb, get ready to flee quickly, and that's why it's unleavened bread. They don't have time to put any leaven in the bread, and they mark the doorposts of their home so the angel of death won't kill a child that's in that home, and they're getting ready to get out of there quickly.
That's happening simultaneously. The packing and the unleavened
Yes,
bread and all that. And in
It's all-
the meantime,
That's the first event, and then the celebration of Passover is the commemoration of that event in the ancient world.
So they would never forget that.
I knew somebody was looking for a baby, but I was
Yeah,
getting the babies mixed up.
that's what you were doing, yeah.
Yeah,
Not baby
okay.
Jesus, baby Moses. Okay.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, Passover has to do with the Moses story.
Baby Moses?
Well, no, don't worry about it. No,
He hadn't been a baby for a while.
no. Yeah, he grew up. And when he came back as a man, he was the prophet who God used to deliver the people of Israel.
Right.
And the first Passover was that.
Commemorating, saving
That's exactly
the
right.
Jewish babies.
So they would never forget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, then...
And one other thing, then at the Seder, every year, at the Seder, they're commemorating that event, but it's a commemoration which makes present to them the event. So they're participating in the event simultaneously in this generation, what happened eons ago.
Okay, thank you.
And so the Christian Passover is the Last Supper commemoration, and that's what we commemorate every Sunday. You know, so the Passover was a way that by celebrating it as a festival every year, they were remembering and reliving those events. Just like at Mass, every Sunday, we are remembering the Last Supper and the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. That's why we have the mystery of faith. We proclaim it. Christ has died, Christ has risen, will come again. It's like it's constantly programming us. So it's in your DNA. The interesting thing is that the more of this, because this has been so repetitive in my life for so many years, and for people like Tony who have been practicing Catholic all your life, for so many years, that now these stories I can recall. I mean, it's in me now. It's not just something out there on a piece of paper or that I hear from someone else. The story is in me because of the constant repetition. And even themes of the story show up in my dreams. So the more you immerse yourself in the story, the more the story becomes a part of you and begins to affect a change and transformation in you. Okay. Number 3, verses 15 to 22, we have the feast, we call Pentecost. It's actually called the Feast of Weeks. It is a week of weeks, which is 7 weeks, which is how many days? 49 days. And the day after that is day 50, Pentecost. Pentecost is a pilgrimage feast. You go to the temple. It is also celebrating the wheat harvest because the wheat is ready to be harvested. Usually happens in June. The later tradition is it is a commemoration of the giving of the law at Sinai. So that 50 days after the first Passover, they were at Mount Sinai receiving the law from Moses. Okay? That's what it commemorates. Then we have... on number 4, verses 23 to 25, there's New Year's Day. You've heard of Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Trumpets. It is in the 7th month of Tishri, which would be roughly late September, early October for us. The Jews observe, like the Muslims, a lunar calendar. We follow the Latin tradition of a solar calendar. So that's why sometimes it's earlier or later. By the way, there is one day in the Christian calendar that we follow the lunar calendar. It's the only day we do that. You know what day that is? Easter. That's why Easter keeps moving around, because it's not on a solar calendar. Sometimes it's in March, sometimes it's in April. The date of Easter is determined by this formula. Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. And that's why it keeps moving, because the solar calendar and the lunar calendar don't always line up. Now, so that's how the date of Easter is determined. Okay, it's based on a lunar calendar rather than a solar calendar. Okay, then they have in Leviticus the Day of Atonement. You've heard of Yom Kippur. They do it all in one day. What we do in 40 days in Lent, they do in one day on Yom Kippur. Okay, and then number 6, verse 33 to 44, the Festival of Booths, or Sukkot. It is a pilgrimage feast celebrated in Jerusalem, and it commemorates the journey from Sinai to the Promised Land. In other words, it helps the people of Israel remember that for 40 years they wandered in the wilderness, and they lived in temporary structures.
Did you spell that?
Oh, Sukkot, I'm sorry. S-U-C-C-O-T-H, Sukkot, which means booth or tabernacles. Now, do you remember the Transfiguration? Some people believe that the Transfiguration took place close to the time of the Feast of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths. And the reason they believe that is because when they were up on the mountain, you remember that? Jesus is transfigured. Moses and Elijah appear on either side. A great cloud of the Shekinah glory, and the disciples who were asleep wake up and they see this thing and they're, oh, what did I drink? But anyway, they're up there and they don't know what to say. They're terrified by this whole experience. And then Peter says, oh, I have an idea. Why don't we build a tabernacle or a booth? One for Elijah, one for Moses, and one for Jesus. And we can sit here, And non-Jewish people, it just goes by them what Peter is saying. But a Jewish person would say, oh, he's talking about, because every Jews to this day still build their temporary booth or tabernacle in their backyard. For that feast. And that feast usually takes place in late November. Okay. Now, that is the end of the Hebrew liturgical calendar. I want you to turn to the other worksheet, which I want to get through quickly today. Oh, here it is. Do you have this one? Because we're going to look at the Christian one. It's this one here. You got it? The liturgical year. We looked at the Hebrew one, and ours is based in that. Now, Jesus practiced a religion which had a liturgical calendar, and he was an observant Jew. He observed all those holy days. We're not Jewish, and it's not incumbent upon us to observe Torah. But we do have a Christian calendar. The liturgical calendar carries the story of our salvation history, the Christian mythos. The big story. Introduction. The liturgical calendar follows the Christ event. That's our big story. From the incarnation to the second coming. Through the observance of the liturgical calendar, we relive the Christ story, and our own life story becomes integrated into the Christ story as if we were really there in some mysterious way. We are there. We also bring the Christ story into our present. The Christ story becomes integrated into our story. We relive the Christ story in order that the Christ story will live in us. Do you like that? Yes. You can quote me on that. That's a good one. I have to say. Amen. Amen. We relive the Christ story in order that the Christ story will live in us. It begins with the season of Advent. The season of Advent is the season of anticipation, celebrated in anticipation of Christmas. However, we not only look back to the events leading up to the birth of Christ, we also look to the future hope of parousia. Parousia means the appearing. The appearing is the return of Christ. The appearing. With the consummation of the new age. The age that is to come, and in fact is already coming. The coming of the full manifestation of the glory of the new creation. And we have certain themes in Advent, and if you remember back, you'll remember we have these on banners. We try to talk about this. The themes are, the first week, to watch, be vigilant, be alert. Number 2, the second week is prepare, get ready. 3, rejoice, because there's joy in waiting. And 4, behold, the fourth week, the sun is already beginning to the dark sky of night is beginning now. We can see on the eastern horizon the various colors of twilight, morning twilight. So that's what the fourth Sunday celebrates. The Advent images. Well, number 1, the apocalyptic seers of Israel. This is where you get all those apocalyptic passages about the end of the world. Daniel, Jesus' apocalyptic seer, the apocalyptic message of Paul. These readings show up then. Also, number 2, the prophets of Israel, Isaiah and John the Baptist, both have a prominent place in Advent. Number 3, the daughter of Israel. Who is the daughter of Israel? Mary, the Annunciation, the Visitation. So there's a strong Marian theme in Advent. And the hope of Israel. And who is that? Well, Joseph, the husband of Mary, symbolizes that. So these are major images or archetypes of the Advent season. Each season has its own archetypes, if you will. There are the Advent colors, which is blue-violet. Advent is not another Lent. It's not just purple, it's blue-violet. And many churches, like St. Matthew's, have chosen just to go with royal blue. Blue is the color of the nation of Israel. It's their national color. You know how we have colors? Their color is blue. Also, blue is always associated with the Virgin Mary. So if there's a Marian special holy day, the priest will wear blue vestments. And oftentimes in iconography, Mary's shown wearing a blue outer cloak. Okay, Advent symbols. The Advent wreath and the Jesse tree. We use the Advent wreath, and that's why we light the candles. And that can also be a home. I urge you to do an Advent wreath at home next Advent. Just do it. And and read the scripture reading. You know, it's a great practice to do as a couple, as a family, or even as an individual. And then the Advent is a penitential season. Okay? What do I mean by a penitential season? Is a season to recollect and to change your mind about how you're living. Okay. Roman numeral 2, the Feast of Christmas. By the way, that Christmas carol on the first day of Christmas, blah, 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 the 12 days of Christmas, they got it right, even though most people have forgotten what the 12 days of Christmas. Christmas is not just one day, it's 12 days. It's a 12-day feast, the 12 days of Christmas. And the big theme there is the nativity narrative. Other themes are the Holy Family, the holy name of Jesus, the presentation of Jesus in the temple, and his circumcision. And the Christmas color is white. White stands for glory, luminosity, light. Number 3, the Epiphany of the Lord immediately follows. That's the manifestation of Christ. In other words, Jesus was born in humble, hidden circumstances, but now has become made manifest. And there are 3 Epiphany stories or themes. Now, can you cut off the camera? We're going to do this. Okay, good. We're going to go next door. No one's missing?
Sorry.
Oh, there's Mother Di. Okay. Okay. This is a triptych. Triptych is a series of 3 images that correspond with one another. This triptych is the triptych of Epiphany. And there are 3 themes or stories that are associated with the Epiphany. Number 1, the visit of the Magi. See? So on Epiphany we celebrate the visitation of the Magi, the wise men, to bring adoration and gifts to the Christ child. The second theme of the Epiphany is the baptism of Jesus. And the third theme of Epiphany is the wedding at Cana. Epiphany means to manifest. That which is hidden now is made known. In the first story of the Epiphany, Christ is made known to the Gentiles, symbolized by the 3 Magi. They were the first Gentiles to recognize him as the Christ, and we who are here follow after them. We're Gentiles, right? So that story is meaningful to us because it means we get in too. Christ is manifested to them. In the baptism, we have what is called an epiphany, an aha moment. But this time, the revelation is to Jesus. Because the voice from heaven is talking to Jesus, not to the prophet John, not to the people standing on the side or the angels that are there holding towels. Which I don't know how that got into the story. But anyway, but in the baptism, you are my beloved Son. In you I am well pleased, my beloved, my dear Son. That was the moment Jesus came into full consciousness of who he was, and then he knew what his mission was. I've said that so many times. But this is when he had a manifestation of the vision at his baptism, which revealed to him a confirmation from his fathers who he was. No, you're not going crazy. You know. And then Jesus reveals himself to his disciples, which represents the church. The disciples are the church. And the end of the story is he makes this miracle of transforming water and wine. And at the end of the story, John says, this is the first of the miraculous signs that Jesus performed. Thus, he was glorified, and his disciples believed in him. You see? It's all about revelation, epiphany, manifestation. That which is hidden is now made known. That is the theme of Epiphany. The hidden God becomes visible in the incarnation of Jesus in these moments. And so this triptych has everything to do with the feast of Epiphany. So I wanted you to really see that. Now let's quickly go back to the class to finish our lesson. It's a time, so I can remind you of something here. I'll take full advantage of it. Nothing in our sacred space is there by accident. It is expressing through art and the visual the big story. You could go through our church and just look at the artwork and you get the whole gospel. It's all there. The whole story is there. So nothing is incidental there. Okay, so we talked about Epiphany, and it commemorates the visit of the Magi, the baptism of Jesus, and the wedding of Cana. And the color of Epiphany is like that of Christmas. It's white. Then we have ordinary time. And ordinary time you think is, well, ordinary time is nothing holy about that. No, it's really actually one of the most holy times of the season.
And it's green.
And it's green. You ever notice that? We use green a lot. It represents the Galilean springtime. During ordinary time, we are reliving the experience of the early disciples of Jesus as our teacher. He's teaching us. We get all the parables, we get all the teachings, all the miracles that Jesus did in his ministry. That's what ordinary time does. It commemorates that 3-year ministry of Jesus.
Very fruitful.
What's that?
Very fruitful.
Fruitful.
Yeah.
And green represents life. It's a time of spiritual growth. And we're moving. Then we have the season of Lent. That is the 40 days, Quadrasima. It is a penitential season, and Lent begins with Ash Wednesday. The theme of Lent is journey. Journey to Jerusalem. It also reminds us not only of the journey of Jesus to Jerusalem, but our own journey to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the place of death. It's also the place of resurrection. And we all have a destiny with death and resurrection. So Lent reminds us of our mortality. It also reminds us, even though we're mortal, we're not sitting still. There is movement forward to destiny. And it is ultimately with death, which is not pretty. However, if you don't die, you don't experience the resurrection. Mm-hmm. So you have to die in order to be raised from the dead. Okay, the stories associated with Lent. The temptation of Christ is the first Sunday. The second Sunday is the transfiguration of Christ. The third Sunday is, it changes, but it's the Samaritan woman or the cleansing of the temple. The fourth Sunday is the man born blind. The fifth Sunday is the raising of Lazarus, which we had this year, or the woman caught in adultery. Okay. Themes and images of Lent. By the way, the desert wilderness is an image of Lent. We're wandering like the Jews did in the desert. We're wandering for the 40 days in the wilderness of our own lives. This is why there's no flowers in the church during Lent. We're out in the heat of the desert, a place that's hostile to life. It also commemorates the temptation of Jesus. Remember, he went for 40 days into the desert. Another symbol or image of Lent is the holy mountain. Mount Sinai is referred to in the readings and plays a part in the story. There's also Mount Tabor, which is the Mount of Transfiguration, and Mount Zion, Jesus and the temple. Remember, God is God of the mountains. We refer to the mountaintop experience. So a mountain, or these mountains, are highly symbolic for us and remind us of certain events. Another theme is death and mortality. Remember, Lent begins with the words, as ashes is being placed on your head. Remember, Steve, that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. That's chilling. I loved it this year. Did you hear Mirella play and sing Dust in the Wind? And wasn't that perfect for that day? I go, oh, wow. That says it right there. So you can add to your thing, Dust in the Wind. Okay. And then the color is red-violet. So even though it's purple, Advent is blue-violet, Lent is red-violet. Why? Because it's about the martyrdom of Jesus. Holy Week. It begins with Palm Sunday or Passion Sunday, and it commemorates the entry into Jerusalem of Jesus. The symbols are palm and olive branches. By the way, I put pussy willows there. You know why in Northern Europe they couldn't get palm branches? Like Northern Germany or Scandinavia or Russia, they would use pussy willows. And if you go and see some Lutheran churches, which are Scandinavian, or Russian Orthodox churches, on Palm Sunday, rather than giving out palms, they give out pussy willows. You know, did you see that when where you live? You had palms.
Well, those little, like, buxes, those little bushes.
Bushes?
We call it buxes.
Oh.
It's a little, it's not even a palm.
Oh, you got something completely different going.
Very weird, you know.
Okay, if you go to Belgium, remember that they do not use pussy willows or palms or olive branches. They use, what's it called?
Buxes.
Yeah, whatever she said. Okay. Then the symbols of Palm Sunday are the palm branches or olive or pussy willows, the crown of thorns, and the cross. B, the Mass of Holy Chrism. It's the time when the bishop blesses the holy oils that are used throughout the year, and it's the time the priests renew their vows. Then we come to the holy or the sacred part of the most holy part of Holy Week, the Holy of Holies, and that's the Triduum. It's a liturgy that lasts from Thursday till Sunday, although we take long breaks between different parts. Holy Thursday is the Mass of the Lord's Supper. There are certain actions that we do, washing of the feet, the stripping of the church, and the transfer of the Holy Eucharist out of the church. Because on Good Friday, when you go to any Catholic church, there's no vigil lamp lit. It's off. The tabernacle's open. It's empty. You don't genuflect when you go into a church on Good Friday. Jesus is not there. The sacrament's not there. It's been moved to the altar of repose, which symbolizes the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay? Then we have images, the table, grapes and grain, bread and wine. The upper room, the Garden of Gethsemane. Then we come to Good Friday. It's the death of Christ. We only wear black. That's the liturgical color. The Passion narrative we read is from the Gospel of John. We have stations in veneration of the cross, and we remember the burial in the tomb. And Good Friday ends with Jesus being in the tomb. And the color is black. Did you like that experience, Steve and Kristen, when we did it with the Episcopalians? You did so good doing that prayer. I have to let you in on an inside joke, and I said, Steve, will you read the reading at this point in the service? And so we did the service, and the reading came, and then I read it.
Right as I'm getting ready to start, he just goes.
I just goes. And then I look at him, and he's looking right at me. I go, and in the part that I was supposed to do, the prayer part, I go, and he got it, across the room, and he said the prayer. It was cool. It's flawless. Okay, then Holy Saturday, guess what? Nothing. Emptiness. No sacraments. It's about grief and mourning. The dark night of the soul. Then we have the Easter Vigil, and the symbols there are very rich. It's darkness and light, the blessing of the fire, the blessing of the Paschal candle. Sunrise, darkness gives way to light. The Hebrew stories of salvation are read. The resurrection of Christ's victory over death, the blessing of the water of baptism. Notice that how primal this is. We bless fire, and then we bless water. Renewal of the baptismal promises and baptism, the beginning of the new creation, the first fruits. The color is white for glory and light. Easter season, Christmas was 12 days, Easter is 49 days. Within the Easter season, we have the ascension and glorification of the humanity of Christ. Then finally, Pentecost, the 50th day. And rather than the giving of the law, it's the giving of the Holy Spirit. It's the birth of the church. The symbols associated with Pentecost are wind, fire, the Shekinah, which is the cloud of God's unknowable presence. And the color is red. Then there's Trinity Sunday, which commemorates our understanding of God revealed in three eternal persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Then there's Corpus Christi, which celebrates the reality of Christ's presence in the Blessed Sacrament of his body and blood, soul and divinity. And then we have ordinary time, which lasts from Pentecost to Christ the King, which is the last day of the liturgical year. And Christ the King, we commemorate the second coming of Jesus, which is yet to happen. So there you have it, everyone. I kept you late. I'm sorry about that. But that's the liturgical calendar. Has this been helpful to you? Yeah.
So
Very good.
What are the dates of Trinity, Corpus Christi?
First Sunday after Pentecost, because Pentecost is connected to the date of Easter, so it moves. But Pentecost is always on a Sunday, and then the week after is Trinity Sunday, and the week after that is Corpus Christi. Okay. I want to thank you all for being here and remembering that we were actually going to have a class tonight.